Hi, good afternoon, all. I, Shweta Bharti, would like to welcome you all on today's chat show. Today's chat show name is Factoring One Stop Solution for Your Global Aspiration. So, today we have amazing speaker, Miss Asha, here. So, she is going to talk about ESG aspiration. Okay, and Yeah, so I'm just going to brief profile about Ms. Asha. So she is done graduation in business management from Bangalore University, completed a chartered accountancy course in the year 2008, and right now she is working in ENY as a executive director. And she has really involved in significant amount of client training for large multinational client. Hello. Yeah.
Can hear you, Shweta.
Yeah. So welcome, Asha, here in this platform.
Thank you, Shweta.
Yeah.
You can hear me, Shweta?
Yeah.
All right.
And Asha having has over 19 years of experience in IFRS, US GAAP, Indian GAAP accounting and regulatory matters, and has over 8 years of experience in academic training, corporate training, lecturing, seminar, and conferences, etc. Uh, Now I'm going to talk about India factoring. India Factoring is a premier trade finance institution registered with the RBI as a AD3 in 2009, and it holds a NBFC factor license. Our flagship offering, the non-recourse product, help client to avail factoring without the facility appearing as a liability in their balance sheet. Such niche structured trade finance product from India Factoring offer ease and flexibility in managing working capital requirement of business by funding an agreed percentage of invoice soon after shipment of goods or after the services have been rendered. We are the world number 7 and have been a market leader in export factory in India since 2018. So, hi Asha. Today we are going to talk about ESG related matters. Okay, so welcome to the chat show. So, I have first question for you here today is what are the ESG basic responsibility and why is the ESG important for the company?
Shweta, I would like to start to thank you and Gaudi and India Factoring for having this platform and having me on this show, right? So ESG per se is a great topic and a topic of debate, significance, opportunity. I think it has ticked boxes all over on these spaces, whether it's education front or investors front or whether it is the reporting front. It's one of the most happening topic. So before even I address your question of how is basically why ESG is important, I think we'll keep a little aside, right? So it is going back to a basic way of living. When we go back probably a couple of centuries ago, right, a decades ago, the way our ancestors have made certain principles around dharma and karma, we call it as, right. So there's always a way of living and way of doing the things. So over the period when humanity started to actually go beyond wants, beyond needs to wants, right? So the earth started to shake. So we see that China is in the highest category of, I think, global warming. Then comes US, and then comes India. And look at the way I think the entire world is suffering because of the climate change. So World Economic Forum had released the top 10 risks which entire world is going through, right? And the first and the foremost risk is actually a climate change. Whether it is from now to next 3 years or now to next 10 years, it's been addressed to be a highest risk that the entire humanity is going to suffer with, right? Now that itself addresses that why ESG is so important and why does companies need to have an ESG. So I've been into this profession, accounting profession, for almost like close to 2 decades now, and there is a lot of importance that we lay down for reporting accounting matters. But ESG reporting per se is very, very close to me as a person, right? With the way I think our upbringing is done, with the way I think I've come up with the values of the family. It is all about simplicity, right? How organizations truly embed ESG in their way of living, way of doing business, way of inspiring their people to be simple, right? Way of communicating the overall purpose of a humankind is where the ESG takes a shape. So that's, I think, slightly more philosophical side. But if I shift to a corporate side, when we embrace an ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance aspects around around saving the earth, right? Is every organization have to make their own policies and procedures around this. It's important for a board of directors, right? The committees, investors, the highest grade of organizations to think about not just profit being a criteria for an organization to be in a growth path, but also sustainability for being a criteria for an organization to be at a growth path. Like we have seen many examples of companies which I think did very well. Within 10 years, they've tripled their operations. They've gone, of course, they've gone 10x of operations, they've gone 20x in the profits. There are multiple examples that if company doesn't look at the sustainability philosophy, right, and starts to reap the benefits in a short term objective, the life cycle of the company naturally ends much faster. So it's at the interest of every organization that sustainability has to be on the top of their agenda, not just in terms of just making it regulatory requirement, but also making it a requirement for the way of living and conducting the business. So I'll add one more point, Shweta, right? So this is such a vast topic that there are different domains within this topic which are emerging, right? But there are different types of expertise within this topic right now. Now, how do I, technically look at ESG, right? There are 17 sustainability development goals which has been released, right? I think overall spanning to there are about 160 plus sub goals, right? Into poverty, education, women development, a lot of it, conservation of energy, right? Saving the marine life. There are a lot of aspects of the sustainability is laid down into the 17 goals which United Nations had released a couple of years ago. So that's kind of is what is the base for many organizations, but every organization have their own philosophy for ESG. Some companies naturally produce a huge amount of contribution to a climate change. Some companies probably are lesser in the contribution, but it's important for every company to understand what are the areas that they would want to contribute and reduce an emission that they produce it to the overall earth by making an ESG governance and policy. So why is it important for organizations? It is the only way that we save earth, and it's the only way that we create a sustainable businesses for the future. So
Okay.
that's
So,
my answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like it's a very like informative session. This is going on. So just wanted to know one thing. It's my next question to you: how to build ESG framework and that is future proofed for tomorrow economics reality.
There are different frameworks which are available, right, which I think are
Okay.
guiding principles for an organizations to build their own ESG frameworks into different pillars, right? Now, whether they would adopt a regulatory frameworks which are already applicable, like ISSB has its own framework for reporting. GRI is the most commonly used framework, which kind of provides the guidelines around sector specific nuances as well as the common themes around ESG, right? Or there could be a long term value framework, EPIC framework. There are multiple organizations that come up with their own their own methodologies to get to a strong pillar of a framework. So there is also SEC requirement, Shweta, that's come up more technically. SEC has come up with the concept paper, right, on ESG disclosures, the climate change related disclosures.
Yeah.
And they are referring back to a TCFD framework and adopting largely a TCFD framework for getting into an ESG ready corporate environment. So multiple frameworks are applicable. If you look at, I think, a journey of an ESG from year 2000 onwards, right, it started to pick up gradually. And just in the last 3 years during the COVID is when most companies realized and most regulators realized to actually come up with a consolidated frameworks to guide people to put something together. So what's important for companies is to seek, of course, advice, right? Seek expert opinions, because these frameworks could get very complicated when we look at what is available, right, overall in the space. But what's important is to marry those frameworks which are available to a philosophy of the company. So what's the best way of doing it is to first look at the nature of the entity's business, what business that the entity is into, what are the material issues that could impact them from a sustainability standpoint. That could be a climate change, that could be high emissions, that could be reduction of the travels, right, that could be probably their philosophy of high contribution to the society, or that could be their own CSR objectives that they would want to do, and also benchmark with what their peers are thinking about, right? And once they address that these are the several issues that we want to control, right, and have a strategic objective towards achieving a ESG goals and achieving a sustainability path, those material issues then becomes a path for the framework. Then go ahead and like look at what are the different various frameworks applicable and make your own charters, your own ESG charters, your own board charters, right, and your own governance committee. The most important is a steerco or a governance committee that looks at ESG in its true sense, right, in the form it is supposed to be looked at it, and then start monitoring this. There could be different ways of doing it, Shweta. As I said, there are different organizations which are providing there are different regulatory interventions in the frameworks which are applicable right now. There could be multiple things depending on the geography. One could choose the framework. If we are in India, BRSR is one of the most applicable frameworks right now. It's a reporting framework, but it does address the different aspects of what needs to be covered from an ESG standpoint. So it's a combination of all of this the company has to get to their own ESG framework. And what's important with an ESG is something environmental most important for you, social most important for you, or governance most important for you. It could be proportionally different basis the type of business that you do. The issues that you come across would be different basis the type of business. So choose accordingly and always seek an expert involvement to make a framework. A very strong framework lays down to a sustainable path.
Okay, so just now you used one word. Okay, like CSR. So like all of like big companies, we see they are doing this CSR activity. So I just want to understand what is difference between CSG activity and this ESG. So
I think that's a
you
very
can
good
explain.
question, right?
Yeah.
Everyone actually mixes up. It's used synonymously that CSR and ESG is one and the same. Of course, CSR is a component of an ESG, but it's about who is looking at it. ESG is largely looked from an investor's angle. Investors are conscious about doing sustainable businesses, right? Having sustainable profits, right? Having sustainable relationships and giving something back to the society. A responsible investment is actually a term for investors today. There's enough money. If we go back probably a couple of years ago, maybe getting a VC funding probably would have been an unheard thing, right? You have to maybe struggle for years to get some huge funding. But look at the pace at which we have come. There's, of course, a flow of wealth. There's a flow of generation of a wealth, right? Thanks to many of great visionaries who've created a wealth for the country and for the world as a whole. Getting access to the finance is comparatively much, much faster now. And thanks to organizations like you and organizations, of course, like different financial institutions governed by a very strong financial system that the whole economy carries on, access to funds is not a great issue today. But what is a great issue is the application of those funds. That how do you apply the funds? Where do you apply the funds? Banks are coming up with changing their, of course, including in their loan agreement are clauses related to sustainability and ESG, right? How are you applying your funds? Is can you kind of disclose a report that what is and how it is this used for sustainable businesses? So ESG is a largely a term which is used from an investor's angle, I would say. CSR, of course, is used from a corporate side. CSR as a word always existed, right? It is that you're getting some profits, how do I give it back? You've made sustainable businesses, how do you give it back to the society? But not just giving back to the society, but also from an entire supply chain perspective, from investors to the ultimate customer, how do I, in the philosophy of the business, embed the aspects of environment, social, and governance is all about ESG. So, to highlight in one liner, who looks at, right? CSR is looked from more of a corporate angle, ESG is looked more from the investor's angle.
Okay. And one more question from Mr. Ramanathan. Okay. So he just want to know, like one of the sustainable development goals is about nil poverty. Is enough being done to tackle this goal by countries all over the world? It's a
That's
very good
the,
question, actually.
that is such a heart touching question,
Yeah,
Ramanathan. Uh,
right. Right.
Sustainability development goals, when we look at it, right? So it is so surprising to see. I think if a particular family, right, or a person earns they're about $1.25 a day, it's considered to be above the poverty line. Can you imagine? We're talking about just $1.25, thereabout, amount that one has to earn to just eliminate the poverty line. So there is it enough being done? I don't really, Ramanathan, have a very good answer to it. But of course, the infrastructure development, the economic development, the policies that the government from India perspective is actually coming up, right, in terms of encouraging art, right, encouraging infrastructure, encouraging different fields of the domains, to an extent has opened up multiple opportunities to people. But is enough being done is also two way to look at it. Who should do it? That's a question. When we say enough being done, is it we each individually have to take a responsibility to do it, or are we relying on someone else to do it? If you're saying is government doing enough, maybe they have some policies, right? They have some procedures. There are different types of schemes the Prime Minister office comes up with, which eventually have to reach to an ultimate, person who is in the need of that money, right? But is it reaching? Of course, we cannot talk about a system of a corruption, bribery, right? All of these, of course, are not getting the supply chain to get to the end. So, to an extent, is government doing their part? I will have a very limited right to talk about it. Maybe they're doing their part, but in the chain, is people are changing themselves to ensure that everybody has a right to finance and everybody is getting the right part of the money. It is every one of us who have to contribute. See, I beautifully like this concept of SMEs, right? The small and medium scale, the micro small scale sectors, if you look at it. There's a beautiful video, Shweta, that I was looking at it. The video explains about how the wealth distribution happens in a micro small sector. Just take an example that we take a roadside food. We eat two idlis on the roadside, right? He may charge us just 15 rupees for it. But look at what he keeps with him. This 15 rupees in a supply chain gets distributed equally to everyone who contributed to get that sale of a 15 rupees idlis on the road, right? Now we go to a five-star hotel, extremely high posh hotel. We pay 400 rupees or 200 rupees for the same set of two idlis. Now look at the wealth distribution. What goes to the ultimate person, right, including a farmer who has got the contribution back to our food? What is going back to him in the wealth distribution is very limited. Right? Now, this concept is not new and it will never end actually. Pareto came up. I'm sure you all heard of a concept of a Pareto analysis, right? Pareto in what 1800 centuries, probably way ago, wrote a concept of wealth distribution and came up with this concept that 80% of the wealth will always lie with 20% of people, right? And 20% of the wealth will always lie with 80% of people. Now we apply this concept in every field literally we apply this concept. It's a strategic concept to apply. Unless until an equal wealth distribution happens, right, we will not be able to eradicate this line of poverty. That's point number one. Now, what is enough done? Each one of us have to start living simple life to do enough, right? Have that, I think, courage to contribute back enough. It starts from each one of us. If all 7 billion people think that, okay, my little contribution has no sense to make, then all 7 billion people are actually thinking the same thing, that someone will change. So it's about the overall change management that everyone have to go through. I can keep on and on and on and on and about it, but of course, we are getting there from a developing economy to a developed economy, overcoming multiple challenges of trade and commerce. Right? I'm very hopeful that India, maybe matter of years, if this momentum continues, should ideally give a decent living to everyone.
Okay.
The change
And
starts from us to start.
it's a good learning for us actually, like lots of knowledgeable things, and we are getting lots of ideas and other things so we can implement in our company also. Like I just would like to ask one more question. Like we know, like that each company would like to see their progress. Okay, so could you please let us know how do companies measure their progress in ESG part? So
There are different ways of doing it, Shweta. So there are different tools which are available, right? There is a scientific way of computing the emissions, right? Now, what is important is, what do you mean by ESG progress? You have to define. Over the period, we have defined what is profit, right? Profit is defined to be a quantitative number. And there's a methodology that we have derived to get to a profit number, whether it's a cash profit or whether it is a operating or a business profit. There's a methodology that over the period we have derived to get to a quantitative number. Profit is always a quantitative number, but ESG is just not quantitative, right? ESG is a lot to do with qualitative as well, right? Now it's about the companies who have to make their KPIs to start with. If I say that, as an example, in our organization, we want to touch 1 million lives by 2025. Now that's the KPI that we have in terms of, I think, touching the lives of the people. Now what I do to touch is different way of computing it, whether it is educational initiative, whether it's an entrepreneurial initiative, whether it is environmental initiatives. End of the day, each of this initiative will touch someone's life. Right? Now there's a mechanism that we draw to measure the ESG progress. Similarly, every organization will have their own, first their own strategy, ESG strategy, right? Then their own ESG goals. What is that I want to achieve? What are those three things that we want to measure? Then a mechanism gets developed to measure. Said that, as I said, there are different ways of computing emissions. There are different ways of computing, a reduction in emissions. There are different scientific and technical methodologies to get to a environmental or a climate or a sustainability related computation. So I'm an accountant. For me, everything boils down to the numbers, right? I look at probably an ESG progress from the way the quality of the reporting happens. What is the quality of the reporting the company is talking about? Are you able to quantify end of the day that these are the 5 or 10 outcomes that we've achieved on account of an ESG development, right, within our own company? If you're able to convincingly, not greenwashing, as you, I think, some point of time use the word, right? Not greenwashing, but actually convincingly disclose to the world that this is our path, I think you get to an ESG progress. There are rating agencies. Of course, if I have to talk more technically, there are rating agencies which are rating, in the scale of which company is doing much better in the ESG objectives. They have their own databases, their own methodologies to rate the companies, right? Different ways and means in which this gets done. No one single methodology, Shweta, that I could answer, like profit, which is revenue minus cost is equal to profit. I don't have a formula for ESG progress, but it is, I think, the way the company structures the overall KPIs and a governance towards monitoring those KPIs, and backed by tremendous technologies which are available today to get to the answer of the computation of what you want. Important philosophies avoid greenwashing. It is not for others that we report, right? It is for us. We'll have to get that ESG progress truly. Muskan is
So
asking a
we
question. What
have one more.
steps?
Yeah, Muskan, she's asking question. What step we should take in our individual capacity for sustainability?
Such a beautiful question, Muskan. I think it starts with your name, right? That you just have to always keep a
Yeah.
smile on your face. That in simple word means that differentiate between a want and a need very, very clearly, right? What we want is very limited than what we need. Right? It's always that big difference that one has to understand from an individual perspective. Do I need five cars, right? Do I need five buildings? Do I need very lavish life? It's an individual choice. No comment about any individual. It's a choices that we draw. But in the overall choices, right? Now that we are in May, Shweta, I'm sure you know that this is a mental health month, right? May is all about a mental health month. And going back, I think with the way generations have come through, Muskan, to your point, right? Are we more happier than our older generations are? Right? If you ask a question that are we still say that old is gold, old is better, my school days are better, my grandma was better, my grandpa was better, we always are looking back and saying that we are better, which means are we deteriorating every time? Because we never say that the future is bright, today is the best. We always say that the past is better, and historical things were really good. So does it mean that we're only in a deterioration path? I don't think so. So each one of us in our individual capacity clearly have to differentiate between a want and a need, right? Point number one. Point number two, I think have to have a clear consciousness to get to a individual level of a sustainability. Very conscious living is what can get where we want to get to, right? And that could differ for each one of us, but we will have to contribute in our own way. We call it as a circular economy, right? We know the concept of a circular economy versus a linear economy. And what is linear economy? That you do something, right? A waste happens, a waste gets produced, and waste gets spread all over, and there is just waste. What is circular economy? I create something, the waste gets generated, waste gets converted into a very productive things that I could use, right? And it again comes back to me. Now, our families are the first foremost places where circular economy works. I know I'm in a big chat show and I'm conscious, but if I still take a step back and talk about a personal life, right? My mother actually lives a circular economy life. Nothing at home gets wasted. Nothing at home, right? Including the vegetable skins that goes to, the pots as a compost too. I think the old clothes that goes to wipe the tables and the chairs, everything gets into a circular economy because they've understood the importance of content living. Everything is circular economy. Whereas I keep telling her, why this? Let's buy a posh screen wiping cloth, right? Let's buy the compost from outside. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's buy everything fancy. Let's make a house a five-star hotel. But the concept that my mother follows is always that this has to be no waste generation. There cannot be a waste, right? Maybe in my philosophy, if I leave that to you, Muskan, see how much you can reduce the waste on a daily basis, right? That is what we can give it back to the sustainability. Yeah. So Shweta, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Like your clarification. Now you're able to hear me? Hello?
We can now hear you, Shweta. I think you were just shaking.
Yeah, yeah, some yeah. So now next question. from
No, Mona has a beautiful thought actually. I don't think so it's a question, but it's a absolutely beautiful thought,
hello.
Mona. So I really like this words of mindless destruction to mindful utilization. Is a very beautiful way of saying how to reduce waste. Shweta, you can hear us? Shweta, can you hear me or you're frozen?
Hello.
All right. So picking up the next question, no, maybe I think Shweta is frozen a little bit as she comes back. Rushali, where is India on sustainable goals? Um, way to go. Yeah. So Rushali, I think it's slightly a way to go. 2030 is the target that India made for EV vehicles, electronic vehicles, right? To make largely on the roads.
Question is
Yeah, serious network challenge. Should I keep going? Sorry. So, Shall I was saying 2030 is a time where the EV vehicles, India wants almost all the vehicles on the road to be an electronic vehicles. Huge progress in those lines. You would see a lot more startups, a lot more initiatives in the EV space that has come up, right? Including many funding agencies, many VCs have got a theme of EV. Of course, a portion of that goes for getting into a electric vehicles over the period of time. So maybe that's one good goal for us, very close to getting to a sustainability goal in one small form. 2070, I think, is where India want to become the carbon negative country, right? So basically, a net zero target for India is going to be 2070. So a long way to go, considering that we are the largest populated country, right? Without discounting that fact, beating China as well very recently, as you know, we're now like 50,000 more people than China is, highest in terms of the resources. The biggest power India has is actually resources. Some point of time, I think, a couple of years ago when they were looking at what is rich, right? What do you mean by rich? The concept of the richness is by the number of resourceful um, maybe people that country has. And I think that's where India is. Most of our generation is into the mid age and young age and millennials who are ready to do things, right? Most of our people are educated, very well educated, can speak global language. I think we're in a path where we are definitely towards the developed economy. Said that, to get to a sustainable goals, we will have to change 1.4 billion people's mindset, right? It's not an easy journey. Unlike some countries where the net zero has already been achieved, or maybe it will be achieved in a couple of years from now, 10 years from now, India is a slow journey. We have to acknowledge the diversity that the country brings in, acknowledge the complications that the country brings in, acknowledge the cultural nuances that the country brings in. It's not easy to get to a mindset change, very big shift to get to a net zero economy in a very, very short span of time. But I think beautiful initiatives by government. There are definitely initiatives by government on the other side of the table, which is very small set of people, but a large side of a table, which is I think a large group of all of us, 1.4 billion people that we have. We all have to work towards the sustainable goal, get to that net zero. But I think going by the paper, 2070 is the target. If you are all, I think, more conscious, like our next generation, right? My kids are extremely conscious actually on many things. Probably we may get much faster. Next question, Shamanta is asking,
Yeah.
as
So
ESG factors,
yeah,
yes,
next
go
question.
on.
Yeah. ESG factor become more prominent in investment decision. What are the emerging trade in ESG integration with the investment portfolios? And how can asset managers balance finance with long-term sustainability objectives?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, Shamanta. The sector per se, right, the wealth asset management sector per se is the most predominant sector that is embracing a concept of an ESG factors. Whether you talk about green loans or whether you talk about green funds or green bonds, right, green infrastructure bonds, there are many, I think, funds that that are actually dedicated only for the purpose of ESG investments. I was also talking to some of our clients who are into our wealth asset management sector, the investment sector, right? Overall, that even there are compelling regulations for this sector that are going to come up, right? Very shortly, we will find even the way the sector measures its performance, its portfolio has to have an element of a sustainability. So there are multiple key themes that are coming up. Private equity investors are getting due diligences done. Any private equity fund, before investing into any of the businesses, the ESG due diligence is an emerging theme. They thoroughly study their business objective and the way they want to neutralize the harm that they're going to give it to the society, right? So of course there always has to be a balancing act, right? So we cannot in the business always be very very noble and say that I cannot produce any emission. But when you produce an emission, how do you balance it out? What are the different areas that you work on? Whether it could be forestation, whether it could be whether it could be a very conscious decision in a company to reduce your overall harm to the supply chain, or choosing your vendors who are into the same ESG mindset as you are. So different themes are emerging within the sectors to get there. Balanced scorecard is one way that we will see companies start to get to a performance, right, over the period. So the performance measurement will also change. It is not just going to be financial KPIs. Non-financial KPIs are also in discussion in many of the investment decisions. Now, a non-financial KPI could include a variety of things, right, from emissions that you generate to lives that you impact, to I think supply chain ESG strategy that you adopt, the application of funds that I spoke about, how to apply these funds into a different the sustainability objectives. These are all the factors that one has to consider. There is no single source of truth framework today to say that let me just stick to it and everything is taken care. These are evolving decisions, and portfolios are also capturing this. I'm sure all of you are hearing about green bonds, right? A very biggest concept. In fact, many investment portfolios are related to sustainable businesses, right? They raise money to support businesses with sustainability agenda. That's what I would say, Shamanta. Yeah. What are the main challenges the companies face when integrating ESG principles into their operations and
So,
decision making process?
so
So,
one more question from the audience, Mr. Naresh. What are the main challenges that companies face when integrating ESG principles into their operations and decision making processes?
right. Um, Actually, good question. There are different principles, right? So, if we look at World Business Council for Sustainability Development, they've come up with the different principles that organizations can adopt at the employees level and at the board level to get to their ESG goals, ESG, overall sustainable goals. The biggest challenge the companies would face, point number one, is embracing the concept of ESG itself into the overall ecosystem of the company in which it operates, right? Education, right training, resourcefulness, I think, is the biggest challenge. Everyone has to embrace the concept in order for a company to actually get to a sustainable operation. So that's one big challenge. ESG as a concept, and hence I think we see a lot more proactive steps taken by many companies and many regulatory authorities to improve the awareness about the concept of an ESG. That's one big challenge. Two, greenwashing today is not really regulated as much as it should have been regulated, right? There's no audits per se which are very strongly calling out the misstatements or the deviations from the philosophy of the company. ESG audits are a little way to go. We still are talking about limited assurance from an India perspective. Gradually, a reasonable assurance will take some more time to get. And when we get to a concept of a limited to a reasonable assurance and have probably a ESG audit becoming more strong domain, maybe the concept of a greenwashing slightly will be under control, probably predominantly may also be under control depending on how the regulations would evolve. So the challenge again is that there is no proven the independence assurances, right? It is, so the greenwashing is very much possible, and how to tackle it, that's the second challenge the companies are facing. Third, of course, access to the overall supply chain to get to their decision making process. So ESG is not something that you can unilaterally achieve. You need the overall supply chain that needs to support you. Now, how do you get to the entire supply chain into the same equation, right? And get your objectives married to the overall supply chain objectives is a big challenge. So, awareness, education, true embracement of a concept, real application, these are the different challenges. And the time, out of all of that, the pace at which the world is running, the pace at which reporting has to be concluded, the pace at which we close our financial statements and get to a get to our press releases, etc. In the fast-paced world, just taking a step back to get to a truly meaningful strategy is a challenge that companies face. Next question has come. Shweta, if I can take that question. Gaurav Meher is asking the question: what are some of the criticisms or concerns raised against ESG frameworks? How can these concerns be addressed? One of the main criticism is overloading of information and diversified frameworks which are available. Um, the number of regulators who are regulating ESG is predominantly high. So we were looking at, we were studying the regulations which are applicable for one of our client. The client has got operations in 30 different countries. There are more than 90 regulations in 30 different countries that they have to adopt to, right? They have to follow it. Now, when you're overloaded with the regulations and the regulators and a bureaucracy around so many people trying to interfere to govern things, right? So the criticism is that how much one can handle, right? Is it truly something that we are required to handle, or is it just the tick in the box that I have to report it and I'm done with it, right? I satisfy three regulators who are overseeing me and pressurizing me, and I'm satisfied with what I need to do. The biggest concern is no uniform framework which is available at this point of time. Diversified frameworks, diversified regulations, multiple jurisdictions have got multiple regulations. Right? So I think that redundancies in the overall policies is the biggest challenge that one has to address today. Of course, there are measures taken to do that. US is going to a consolidated framework, which is an SEC framework. UK and Europe countries are largely falling into CSRD framework, right? So APAC largely trying to fall into ISSP frameworks. Of course, geographically, some effort of a consolidation is happening. We start from Kyoto Protocol, two different protocols which came up from then to now, right? There are multiple frameworks which got emerged: TCFD, right? CDP, of course, BRSR from an India context. There are multiple frameworks which got emerged over the period of the time. So, how do we consolidate all of it and make it most relevant for an entity? I think is most important. Now, how do we address this challenge? Is where an expert team that dedicatedly does ESG study and tries to bring a uniformity in their framework and adoption of the framework within an ecosystem that they operate is very important.
Hi,
Gauri,
Asha. Yeah, it seems there's some challenge at Shweta's end, and that's why I am just filling in her shoes. So we have another question, which is from Muskan, and she wants to know. I think the same girl you said keep
Right?
smiling,
Keep
so
smile
she's
on.
smiling.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
question. Yeah, she wants to know what are some emerging trends or innovations in the field of ESG. How can technology and data analytics support the measurement and reporting of ESG performance? As we know, it's all about analytics. What you are doing, you must measure also, and that's how things look good. So, what are your views on this?
So, such a beautiful question, Muskan, again, right? So, there are multiple trends, of course, in the field of ESG, starting from green loans, right? Green bonds to the ESG audits to ESG diligences to multiple things to I think of sustainable businesses, startups with I think the idea of different types of innovations in the field of startups is also I think trending. Most startups now takes the sustainability as a primary agenda and return on investment as a secondary agenda and start presenting their cases. uh, I think numerous concepts which are getting emerged in the field of ESG. Now, technology and data analytics plays the significant role. Big challenge today companies have in ESG reporting is data gathering. It, think about if I'm a retailer, I've got 700 retail organizations. I need to gather a data about the waste management, how much of the waste I've generated from these retail outlets that I have. It is a humongous task. That how do basically I even talk about the concept of a waste. What is waste for me, right? How do I even quantify that? Should I quantify in kgs or should I quantify in some other unit of measurement? Is a very, very big challenge that one has to address. So that's where the technology fills in. Huge amount of an investment the organizations are putting to get their technology platforms stabilized for ESG reporting today, and even for the purpose of measuring ESG performance. The data related to ESG is humongous. Humongous is a very underestimated word, right, Gauri? It is, I think, a much beyond humongous, huge amount of data because we're talking about smallest aspects when we are talking about ESG, right? Just take about environmental. I was discussing with one of the client, right? So they would now want to measure about the quality of the water that they use for their manufacturing activities. How do you measure that? From where do you even pick that, right? So how do you even consider smallest aspects of, I think, taking the ESG metrics, right? Determining the metrics is the biggest challenge. If I talk about a climate change and emissions, how do you quantify emissions? Right? If let's say the employees are traveling left, right, center, so one other aspect to look at is we're in a hybrid environment. We force people to come to office. Coming to office has an emission impact, right? You do actually produce a lot of emission. At the same time, when I go to look at the social aspects of an ESG, it does have got a huge amount of a mental upliftment for people because it's important for humans to be together. Now, how we balance between these emissions, which are part of environmental versus mental health, which is part of social, right? So those, I think, a data components is where technology plays a role. Multiple technology platforms are available. I think enable on right. There is, I think, a lot of startups which are, I think, producing their own ESG related tech platforms, data gathering platforms, platforms to rate ESG performance, right? Platforms to do simulations, right? To see how, I think, different modelings can be done, right? Platforms to do climate change modelings. How does it impact overall? I think it's playing a huge role, I would say. It's This is one of the most trending topic in any of the area, right? People, process, technology will play the role. Whether it is ESG or a non-ESG, those are the three proven concepts which always plays the role, right? If I talk about people in an ESG concept are very important because they are the main source of achieving the goals. If I talk about a process, it's most important because it's a way in which you get to the goal. If I talk about technology, that is the utmost pillar because that consolidates the efforts of the people and the process and has a transparent way of showcasing this to the world. So, people, process, technology are the three aspects one has to stitch in ESG as well. And a huge contribution from data analytics platform. We use Refinitiv very in depth actually. Refinitiv gives data about multiple companies, ESG performance, right? So there are multiple databases on ESG that are available today. A great area to look at it. Even the CERs, right, carbon emission rights we talk about, the trading in CERs, the overall concept of the CERs is also increased now. There are people who are actually trading in the carbon emission rights. The market itself is very much increased. So technology platforms are giving away, like how the stock market operates today, that I can read about the company's financial performance. There are very very nice way of putting data that the companies have come up, where you can look at the non-financial performance of the company and take a decision whether you want to be a responsible investor into that company. So these are all, I think, are different trends in analytics, Muskan. So I'm an accountant. Of course, some of these questions are very beautiful, but if you ask me a question about what are the trends in accounting, I can go on and on and on. Right? The financial statements are shaking actually. So if I have an asset that produces the highest emission, the impairment of that asset has to be much faster, right? From a accountant's perspective. So I'm seeing the financial statements where I have to question that you need to impair this asset faster. If I look at carbon emission rights, the inventory of that is increasing. So accounting for inventory is a very new concept that I'm coming up with, right? So green bonds accounting. How do we even account the concept of the green bonds, right? How do we look at impairment for the overall financial loans? Many concepts in the field of an accounting we are overseeing, and facing.
Yeah, thank you, Asha. I'm sure
Long
we
answer for
started.
a short question, Muskan.
Yeah, I'm sure she got a detailed answer, and our audience also got a lot of takeaways. And for me, it was people, process, and technology, and definitely technology integrates. But today, technology has put us apart. Shweta is not able to connect, so even that happens sometimes. You
And then
mentioned
people
about.
fill in. People fill in, Gauri. That's the power of a people. You always have people fill in. If ever someone says that but artificial intelligence takes away jobs, I always say that artificial intelligence actually gives more, jobs where we connect to people, right? Going back to the objective of why we each of us are species, right? Human species, and each of us are connected because we need a very social connection with people. So with the way I think the generation is moving, we were always fast paced to put head down and work and work and work and work. So technology actually shakes us and say, okay, now you put your heads up, walk around, right? Fill for people, increase your conversations, bring more ideas. I think there's a lot more
Yeah,
power in people. Yeah.
absolutely, and we will always be ahead of machines, is what I strongly believe in.
We made missions, so but obvious, yeah.
Yeah, so while we were talking about the ESG reporting, I remember reading somewhere there are three colors: there's red, there is orange, and there is green. That's how companies are divided into where they are, whether they are, I think, leader, laggard, and there was something in between. So, is there any such reporting mechanism or coloring mechanism, coding mechanism, which is there in India? Because I guess I read it about some other country, but what's happening in India?
More customary, I would say, Gauri, right? Not that I've come across a regulation that asks you to color code specifically, right? Not that I am aware. Maybe I'm happy I'll go back and do some reading about it, but not that I'm aware, which, at least in India, there is no regulation that asks you to color code. The reporting
Okay.
regulation in India is BRSR, right, which is Business Responsibility Sustainability Reporting, which largely has got 108 questions that you have to address in terms of what's your contribution to those 108 questions into different parameters and principles. BRSR has come up with a set of principles through which the whole reporting actually is balancing between the different aspects of ESG. But color coding is a very natural way, or if I took that PPT example for you, right? People, process, and
Yeah.
technology, the process to actually highlight something which is red flag or which is, I think, more of a green zone probably is where people use a rag status, red, amber, and green. It's a very proven concept across, right? Even in COVID time, we had orange zone, we had green zone, we had red zone, where I think one shouldn't go. It's a very proven concept. Rag is a highly proven concept. We use it across, right? It's kind of probably more customary, I would say, Gauri. Not that I know a
Okay.
regulation that mandates it.
Okay. Got it. So, as you know, we are a non-bank and we are into financing. So, here is a question on green financing. What's
Green
happening in
finance.
this area? Yeah, and even in our organization, we do talk about what the prospective client is doing, whether they are following ESG norms or not. There are organizations or clients where there are too many women employed. So S part becomes very important there. There are organizations who are treating chemicals very well. So all those things we have started seeing in our prospective customers also as we,
Absolutely.
yeah, and also in terms of like removing those tissue papers and bringing in a air dryer, or removing plastic and bringing in glasses and rest of it, that one can do at organization and personal level. But especially in the area of green financing, how are you seeing it? Because it's a balancing act. Also, you were talking about a balancing act in one of the answers, because you need to have that earning and you need to also have that sustainability thing. So, how do you think things are going in India when it comes to green financing?
So the concept of electronic vehicles, we are talking about electric vehicles, right? By 2030, India, the most of the roads will have green vehicles, right? Now, funding for that, in simple explanation, is a green finance. I am funding to a cause which is driven for sustainability at large. That could be EV, that could be probably recycling, that could be probably waste reduction. So when organizations have looked at their themes, right, objectives for which the businesses are made, if the objective is towards a very high end sustainability, the green finance does naturally comes into picture. We've got green loans, we've got green infrastructure bonds, right? We've got, actually we also have green construction loans, right, where a construction of a building is taken care by a natural ways and means. If you're able to get enough sunlight, right, additional ventilation, and good enough to reduce your electricity consumption throughout the day, other than nights, I think, where we are bound to use it. But that's kind of the finance where you look at the concepts of how you're contributing to the sustainability. India is doing great, I would say, because if you look at the overall budget, even of the February budget, right, the amount that is dedicated for sustainability is increased, whether it is agricultural startups, whether it is EV startups, or whether it is startups in the different domains of sustainability, the funding is actually increased. But there's a long, long way to go, because 2070, as I mentioned, I think is a target that India has to get to net zero economy, where I'm able to balance an act where the emissions that are produced, I'm actually doing something else to control those emissions, and then getting into a net zero, at least to a net zero activity, that I'm creating a harm, but I'm also doing good. So end of the day, Papa and Punya together reconciles, and I'm kind of at a neutral position. But it's a way to go. Asha, you share my name, so both of us, I think, should hope that we get there very sooner. But the trends are increasing. Investment banks are also heavily focusing on green finance of late. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Asha. I'm sure this would have been very helpful for people who are into manufacturing, who are also into financing. Both sides would have got benefited. And thank you, Asha, for bringing that question. It reminded our guest about her own name. So thanks for being there. Yeah, so Asha, I would like to have a last word from you on ESG, and it's time to close.
So thank you, Gauri. The last word I would have is that this is a topic which is booming, right? There's a lot of opportunities the topic provides for all fields of professionals, which I'm sure every one of us are very experts and eager to contribute. And we are very eager to capitalize the opportunities. So I would not really talk about opportunities. The only thing I would talk and end this is that ESG is not actually a new concept. I will end with what I started, the balance between dharma and karma, right? Which every mythological story spoke about, right? There is certain things that I have to do, I cannot do. There's certain things in a certain way I have to do. I think balancing between dharma and karma is important for every individual and every organization. When we consciously embrace that, right? I think we get to ESG naturally without too much of technical jargons around it. Technicals are always technicals. We give many colors to the words to make it too technical, but in simple words, each one of us are responsible to contribute back to our Mother Earth, right? We can't harm it anymore.
Yeah, rightly said, Asha, and very, very simplistic way also, because we took everything from Mother Earth, and now it's time that if we don't take action, or rather stop those actions, we are not going to have any sustainability. So it's everybody's responsibility, it's every moment's responsibility is what I would say. And you beautifully explained it, the way dharma and karma. So yes, it is always there. And I would finally say that ESG sustainability is not a fancy word now. It's a requirement. We must do it. Otherwise, we are not going to leave anything for us. Forget about the next generation coming in. Thank you so much once again, Asha. And I'm my apologies. There were some technical challenges at Shweta's end, and but you filled in beautifully. Thank you so much for that as well. I'm sure our audience have taken a lot of takeaways from this session. And yes, human being is always going to be over and above machines. We proved it today. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Gauri, and thank you everyone who's listening to me. Glad to be part of this, Gauri. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today and learning a bit more on ESG. Thank you for sharing your questions. I'm sure this was a good session for you to understand more and more about where ESG is, what we are doing, and how India is faring in different areas. So, thank you so much once again. And if you want to know more about India Factoring, we are present on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and we are also there on Instagram. You should look at our website to know more about us. And for now, I'm taking your leave. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, Ram told me that. Yes, yes. No worries, कभी कभी हो जाता है ऐसे. We can try by switching off the video. वो भी मैंने उसको बोला था. I'm sure you would have tried that as well.